All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're basically becoming genetic detectives. In our case, well, it's thyroid cancer, one of the most common cancers of the endocrine system. We're going to crack open its genetic blueprint, to really understand the secret instructions that make this disease tick. Every great detective story has to start with a good mystery, right? And thyroid cancer is absolutely no exception. We know it's on the rise, but there's this really strange pattern in who it tends to affect, and that's our very first clue. And here it is, our first big piece of evidence. Look at this disparity. This cancer is way more common in women. We're talking almost 70% of cases. That means it's nearly 3 times more likely to affect women than men. Now, that is not a random fluke. That's a huge piece of the puzzle.
So, all of this leads us to the big question, the one at the heart of our whole investigation. What is the hidden code, buried deep in our DNA, that's actually driving this disease? To figure that out, well, we've got to sift through a mountain of genetic evidence.
Just like any modern investigation, this isn't about guesswork or hunches. Oh no, this is all about data. And I mean a lot of data. Scientists had to come up with a really systematic way to find the true culprits among thousands and thousands of genetic possibilities.
And just get a load of the scale of this operation. Researchers pulled together evidence from 4 different studies, analyzing a whopping 1,629 tumor samples. By digging through this massive data set, they could start to see the patterns, the recurring genetic fingerprints left at the scene of the crime.
So, to make sense of all this information, they used this really cool concept called a mutational hierarchy. Just think of it like creating a most wanted list for genes. The ones that show up mutated the most often across all those tumors, they get ranked the highest. They become the prime suspects.
And you know what? This whole process worked beautifully. The investigation didn't just turn up some random collection of suspects, it gave them a crystal clear list of the top-tier genetic drivers, the so-called Tier 1 genes.
And here it is, our public enemy number 1, the BRAF gene. Would you look at that? It's mutated in nearly 57% of all cases. That's more than half. It is head and shoulders above all the other suspects, which pretty much makes it the single most important driver of this cancer.
The study itself really nails it in the conclusion, highlighting just how crucial BRAF and its partners in crime, the RAS genes, are in what's called oncogenesis, which is just a fancy science term for how normal cells turn into cancer cells. So we found our main culprits, now we got to figure out how they operate. Because here's the thing, these mutated genes, they don't just sit there. They are saboteurs. They work by hijacking the cell's own internal communication systems, these things called signaling pathways, and they turn the cell's own machinery against itself.
Okay, I know this looks like the world's most complicated subway map, but honestly, that's kind of what it is. These are all the communication lines that tell a cell what to do, when to grow, when to rest, even when to die. A mutated gene, like our prime suspect BRAF, can basically take over one of these lines and completely jam the signal.
So let's break down how this hijack actually works. See, normally, a signal comes in telling the cell it's time to grow. That message gets passed down the line, no problem. But a mutated gene, it's like a broken switch that's permanently stuck in the on position. It just cuts in and starts sending its own rogue message, grow, 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 over and over and over. And that, right there, is how a tumor gets its start. But this is where our detective story takes a really interesting twist. When the researchers looked even closer at the top genetic culprits, they found this super strange pattern, a clue that told them something really fundamental about how this cancer actually works.
What they noticed was that 2 of the most powerful cancer-driving villains, well, they were almost never seen at the same crime scene. They just didn't work together.
This diagram shows it perfectly. You've got BRAF on one side and another big-time genetic culprit, RET, on the other. Now, get this. Out of more than 1,200 tumors that were driven by one of these 2 mutations, only a tiny handful, just 22, had both. They're what we call mutually exclusive. So why would 2 of the most wanted criminals on the list actively avoid working together? Well, the answer is surprisingly simple. They do the exact same job. It's something called functional redundancy. See, both BRAF and RET mutations hijack the very same growth pathways to send that endless grow signal. A tumor only needs one of them to get the job done. It's kind of like having 2 different keys for the exact same lock. I mean, once the door is open, that second key is pretty much useless.
And this brings us to the real payoff of this entire investigation. This incredibly detailed genetic map isn't just about understanding the problem. It's a blueprint for how to fight back. This is the absolute foundation of what we call precision oncology. So instead of using a one-size-fits-all treatment for everybody, doctors can now identify the specific genetic driver, the exact key that's turning the lock in each patient's tumor. If it's a BRAF mutation, they can use a drug that is specifically designed to target BRAF. It's brilliant.
So, let's just quickly recap our whole investigation. We learned that thyroid cancer is driven by this whole hierarchy of genetic culprits, with the BRAF gene acting as the ringleader. We saw how these genes hijack the cell's own communication lines to just fuel endless growth. And, most importantly, we learned that this detailed genetic map gives us a direct roadmap for developing much smarter, targeted, personalized therapies.
And that leaves us with one last really powerful thought. We've just seen how decoding the blueprint for one type of cancer can open the door to precision treatments. So, as our maps for every type of cancer get more and more detailed, you have to wonder what's really stopping us from one day designing a perfect key for every single lock.